When I moved to this small town, I didn't expect much. Just wanted to settle somewhere quiet, find a little peace, and maybe meet some new people. So, after a few weeks of adjusting to the local grocery store routine and discovering which coffee shops didn't make my stomach churn, I decided to try online dating. I figured it might help me make some kind of connection. Not that I was expecting much, just a few casual conversations to break the monotony of being alone in a place where I didn't really know anyone. That's when I matched with Lydia on Hinge. Her profile picture showed a smiling woman in her 30s, dressed casually but still put together. She seemed pleasant enough, though there was something about her smile that felt off. Still, I didn't think much of it. We exchanged a few messages, and after a couple of days, we arranged to meet for dinner at one of the local spots. The restaurant was a small, low-key place. Nothing fancy, but the kind of place where you could talk without the noise of a crowded bar making you scream just to be heard. I arrived first, feeling a mix of curiosity and nerves, and settled into a booth by the window. When Lydia finally showed up, I was taken aback. She looked much older than her pictures had led me to believe. Maybe not a huge difference, but enough that I did a double take. Her face was worn, with deep lines I hadn't expected. And when she stepped out of the car, this beat-up Honda, by the way, there was an awkwardness in her movements, a stiffness that I couldn't quite place. My first instinct was to smile and greet her as I had done with every other person I'd met before, but something inside me told me to take a step back. My gut was uneasy, but I couldn't figure out why. Maybe I was just overthinking it, I told myself. We sat down, and she immediately launched into a long-winded explanation about how her day had been. She spoke in a way that felt strangely erratic. Her voice would dip and rise in pitch, almost like she was trying to force certain words out. I kept nodding, trying to keep up, but I felt myself growing more uncomfortable with each passing minute. And when the waitress came to take our drink order, Lydia suddenly became unnervingly rude, snapping at her in a way that felt unprovoked. The waitress blinked, unsure of how to react, but I quickly gave my order, eager to steer the conversation back to normal. As the meal progressed, the awkwardness only intensified. Lydia kept fidgeting with the salt and pepper shakers, her eyes darting around the room as if she couldn't focus on anything for too long. Her stories seemed disjointed, jumping from one subject to another without any clear flow. I tried my best to remain polite, but inside, I was struggling. I hated that feeling, the one where you're not sure if you should speak up or just wait for the whole thing to be over. I couldn't help but wonder if she was putting on a facade, or if she was really like this. But what bothered me more than anything was the sense that she didn't seem to notice how uncomfortable I was. She was so caught up in whatever world she was living in that it felt like nothing I said could bring her back. Eventually, after what felt like hours, we finished our meals. I paid the check, and we walked outside to the parking lot. I gave her a polite smile, trying to make a quick exit. "It was nice meeting you," I said, hoping she would pick up on the hint. But Lydia just stood there, her gaze following me as I turned to walk toward my car. I hesitated for a moment, feeling her eyes on the back of my neck, and glanced over my shoulder. Sure enough, she was still there, watching. It was the kind of look that sent a shiver down my spine. And that's when it hit me. She was following me, not just behind me, but following me, almost deliberately. The realization made my stomach churn. I tried to shake off the feeling as I drove home, but as I turned the corner and pulled up to my apartment, I couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong. I figured I'd been paranoid, just overthinking a bad date. Still, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder as I got out of the car. I was hoping I was wrong, but deep down, I had a sinking feeling that I wasn't. The rest of the evening felt off, like my gut had been trying to warn me the entire time. I tried to push it out of my head as I locked the door to my apartment, thinking that maybe I was overreacting. After all, people followed other people all the time, right? They just didn't always mean anything by it. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lydia. "Hope you made it home safe. You seemed really tense tonight. Are you okay?" It was strange, considering she hadn't seemed that concerned about my comfort during dinner. In fact, it had felt more like she was so wrapped up in herself that she didn't notice how uncomfortable I was. Still, I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to her possibly being a little too eager, or maybe a little socially awkward. But as I sat down on the couch, my phone buzzed again. "I saw you pull into your place. That's a nice little apartment. Feels cozy, huh?" A cold wave washed over me. I hadn't mentioned where I lived. In fact, I hadn't told her anything about the layout of my place. How had she known that? The unease I'd felt earlier in the evening came rushing back with a vengeance. She was still thinking about me, more than I realized, maybe too much. I sat still, staring at my phone screen, trying to figure out what to do. Should I respond? Should I tell her I wasn't interested and block her number? Before I could even think clearly, another text came through, followed by another, each one increasingly unsettling. "I'm outside. Just wanted to check in, see if you're doing okay. I can't stop thinking about you." I didn't know what to do. My instinct screamed at me to call someone, to get help. But the small town I'd moved to was quiet, almost too quiet. No one seemed to be awake at this hour. I grabbed my keys, not knowing if I was going to run out into the night or simply lock every door and window and pray she wasn't really out there. Then, just as I was about to glance through the peephole, I saw it. A shadow moved outside my window. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then the shape shifted again. It was her, Lydia. She was standing just outside my ground-level window, her face pressed up against the glass, her eyes wide, staring directly into my apartment. She was watching me, and it wasn't some casual glance. She was staring with intent, as if waiting for something. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. All I could think of was that she knew where I lived. She knew my routine, my habits. She had followed me home from the restaurant, and now she was peering through my window like some kind of stalker. I quickly pulled the blinds down, trying to shut the world out, but I could still feel her presence like a cold, suffocating weight just outside the walls of my apartment. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just being weird. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the knot in my stomach was unrelenting. How had she known which apartment was mine? And more importantly, how long had she been watching me? I could hear her footsteps retreating, but the momentary relief I felt quickly faded. I was still shaken, still afraid. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done. She wasn't just watching anymore. No, she was planning something. As I sat on the couch, paralyzed by the creeping sense of dread, the worst possible thing happened. I heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering, the unmistakable sound of a window breaking. I shot up, adrenaline pumping through my veins. She had just broken into my apartment. The sound of the window breaking was like a slap to my senses, an alarm that jolted me into full awareness. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I froze, trying to process what had just happened. Was this really happening? Had Lydia really just broken into my apartment? Panic surged through me, and I scrambled for my phone, almost dropping it in my haste. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a second to dial the 3 numbers I hoped would bring help. "911. What's your emergency?" The voice on the other end was calm, but I could barely form words. My window. Someone's in my apartment," I gasped, barely able to keep the panic out of my voice. "She's inside. I think it's the woman from the restaurant. Lydia? Or... I think she's using a fake name. I don't know, but she's in there. She broke the window." The operator responded quickly, guiding me through the steps I needed to take to stay safe. "Lock yourself in a room. Don't confront her. Stay on the line with me. The police are on their way." I could barely breathe as I followed the operator's instructions. I backed into the bedroom and slammed the door shut, the lock clicking behind me. I grabbed a chair from the desk and wedged it under the door handle, just in case. I sat in the corner, barely able to control my shaking. I could hear the faint rustling outside the door, footsteps moving around the apartment. Lydia, or whoever she really was inside, searching, prowling like an animal. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified in the silence. I kept glancing at my phone, the seconds stretching on forever as I waited for the police to arrive. The operator was still on the line, reassuring me, but nothing could ease the tight, suffocating fear building in my chest. It felt like an eternity before I finally heard the sound of sirens in the distance. They were coming, but how long would it take them to get here? Was Lydia already in my room? Was she coming for me? The thoughts were endless, racing through my mind, and I tried to keep myself focused. Then finally, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens stopping outside. Doors slamming, voices shouting, boots pounding the pavement. It was all real now. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by dread as I heard pounding at the front door. "Police, open up!" the voices shouted. I didn't move, didn't even dare to breathe for a second. But when I heard the officers moving around the building, the heavy thud of feet against the hallway floor, I knew they were here. Help had arrived. The sound of the police breaking down the door was loud and terrifying, but it was also a promise of safety. A few moments later, the door swung open with a loud crash. I could hear officers moving swiftly through the apartment, and a minute later, the door to my bedroom was yanked open. There, standing in front of me, were 3 uniformed officers. They looked at me, their faces stern but understanding, as one of them quickly assessed the situation. "Are you okay?" one of them asked gently, though I could see the tension in his eyes. I nodded, too shaken to speak, and one of the officers moved toward the window to assess the damage. Another one checked the rest of the apartment for any signs of further intrusion. It didn't take long for them to find Lydia, Mariana Reyes, as it turned out. She was sitting on the living room floor, a distant look in her eyes, her hands limp at her sides. The officers placed her in handcuffs, reading her rights as they prepared to take her into custody. She didn't resist. In fact, she seemed almost relieved, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The officers informed me that Mariana had a history of stalking and had been using multiple aliases. Lydia, it seemed, was just one of many names she'd gone by in the past. They assured me that she would be held for breaking and entering, and I was left to process the events of the night, which felt surreal even now. The relief was overwhelming, but the fear didn't leave me. I still couldn't believe that I had been the target of something so personal. In the following days, I filed for a restraining order. The police made it clear that I needed to be careful. Mariana might try to contact me again, but I wasn't sure what the next steps were. I had already been shaken to my core, and now the idea of being alone again was almost too much to bear. I chose not to pursue civil damages, knowing that it would only drain me emotionally and financially. I wanted to put this behind me, to regain some sense of normalcy. But I knew that something inside me had shifted. I would never again take safety for granted, nor ignore the gut feelings that had warned me all along. As for Lydia, or Mariana, she was gone for now. But the memory of those haunting eyes watching me from the window would linger much longer than I cared to admit.